Ms. Lundberg, I'm so happy to meet you first and foremost. It is my utmost pleasure to welcome you and to introduce you to the Romanian public. Now, you have a background as a journalist and as a magazine editor, and I was wondering what exactly triggered your desire of writing fiction?
First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Digital, I would have hoped to be in Romania in person, but
we would have all, yes.
Yes. Well, actually, I think I have always had a dream of becoming a writer since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, since I started reading books myself. But it's not that easy. You have to invest a lot of time to manage to write your first book. And so it took me a while, but I think I always had that dream. And that's also why I applied to become a journalist, because I wanted to write every day.
Now, we have here your debut novel, The Red Address Book, published in Romanian by Litera Publishing. And it is a wonderful journey through the lives of two women whose relationship is organized by an object of memory, this address book. Now, how did that idea come into shape?
Well, actually, I had a great aunt that meant a lot for me. She was my best friend when I grew up. We spent a lot of time together. And when she died, I was in my early 20s, and we went to her apartment to clean it out. And in a bookshelf in her hallway, I found an address book. And in that address book, she had actually crossed out names and written dead next to them. And it broke my heart to realize how lonely she must have been those last years, and how she must have looked through her address book and realized that people were gone. So I guess I had that idea inside of me. And then suddenly one day I knew I wanted to write about how we sometimes forget to ask questions to old people. Because when you get old, it's like you're finished. But I think a lot of old people have they have so much life experience, and they have so many stories. So I knew I wanted to write something about that. And then suddenly one day I was out jogging, actually, and it just hit me that, oh, I'm going to use that address book. So now it's inspired by real events.
Your writing strikes me as that of a collector who is trying to preserve bits of soul. Now, which part did you enjoy the most? Building up the emotions and the feelings of the characters, or making up the story?
Oh, both. You know, when I write my books, it's like I put a little piece of my soul in them. So I live together with the characters forever. I still do. And I listen a lot to the characters. So it's not that I decide how the story is going to be. It's a collaboration between my characters. It sounds very strange, but I live with them and I listen to them, and I also get very emotional by things that happen. When I wrote the Red Address book, I started crying, and I called a friend of mine and I told him that I started crying, and he said, well, she's 96, you knew what was going to happen. And I said, well, I didn't know. So it's very much a creative process for me.
I think it happens in the same way for everybody, because the character is very endearing. You get very attached, and I think we all cry at some point in the story, knowing what's about to happen, you know. So I think it also functions as a conversation between this elderly character, Doris, the owner of the address book, and the younger Jenny. And it is a dialogue of generations, of experiences in a way, of levels of history. But I think there's another dialogue in the background somewhere, and this is your dialogue with the reader. Now, which was a bigger challenge?
Well, that's actually true. And I think I'm very interested in life stories, and I'm interested in how we become the persons we are. And there's a lot of guilt and shame in everyone's life, and you think back on things that has happened, and that is something that I can see now as I've written. I'm almost finished with my 4th novel, and I can see that's a kind of, yes, it comes back that I'm very interested in the whole life, not just a part of it. I'm interested in like the whole, how we become the persons we become.
I'm happy you.
And I guess to go back to your question, and I guess I want to inspire my readers to think about that. Of course.
I'm very happy you mentioned this act of becoming, because we travel through your novel to Sweden, to Paris, to New York, as I said, visiting different levels of history. And I was wondering, how was the writing process? Because, I mean, you just wake up one morning with a story in one place, and then the other morning you're in another corner of the world.
Yes, but I think, and some people have said that she travels a lot, but most people do during a lifetime. If you think about how old Doris is, she's 96. So she has been on some adventures, but that's if you talk to your grandmother or grandfather, they will have things to tell you too. Maybe not long travels, but they will for sure have traveled somewhere. And but I've been traveling a lot myself. And when I was young, I worked as a model in the fashion world, and I worked in Paris and Milan and a little bit in New York. And when you come to, I was very young when I started, I was just 14. And when you come to a place, when you're that young, you see the details, because you're trying to understand what's going on. And it was very scary in a way for me. So I have all those places in my backbone somehow. I know the feeling of coming somewhere and not knowing what the place is like, and not having the language, and all those things that Doris has. So I guess I use a lot of my own experience. It's not true in any way, but I use a lot of my own experience.
Is it in a way, because I mentioned this dialogue of you and the reader, but it appears also to be a dialogue between you and your younger self?
Yes, between me and me. But I'm very interested in philosophy, and I'm very interested in understanding life and understanding people and understanding love and hate and all those things. It takes up a lot of my thinking always, and has always done. I think a lot.
Now, since you've mentioned that, it appears to me that the fragmentariness of the novel, of your style, also speaks about the fragmentariness of life itself. Was this your intention?
Absolutely. And also, I think for a lot of women, like for Doris, she's not in total control of her life. Things happen, and she has to deal with it. And I think that's something that's very common, that you're kind of the victim of life circumstances, and you have to deal with it in some way. So I don't think there's any people who plan their life 100%. Things happen. Shit happens. As they say.
Now, this novel was a huge success. It was translated throughout the world. It was shortlisted for a number of prizes. Now, how did your life change after publishing it?
Well, actually not at all. I live in the same apartment, and I enjoy very much being alone and write. I have two interests. It's writing and reading, a huge part of my life. And I'm also very much an outdoor person. I like to be in the forest, and I like to ski and go mountain biking and those things. So I live pretty much the exact same way, actually. But one thing that has changed is all the lovely letters that I get from readers around the world. And I enjoy it very much. I use the first hour every day to answer readers. And what strikes me the most is that we are so much alike. There's no difference between a reader writing to me from Romania or from Russia or from the States or from Korea. It's the same. And I'm so happy to see that. That has enriched my life a lot. Because it makes me believe in goodness and kindness and love. it's all around us, everywhere. So we're, yeah.
It's very interesting that you've mentioned that, because this was one of my questions. How do you feel about translations, about the fact that your work is published in countries and cultures which are very different from your own?
But I don't think we are that much different.
Yeah.
There's some differences, but in our hearts we're the same. And I think, I mean, we care about each other, we care about our families and our children, and we want to be loved. That's something that every person strives for, I think. And we want someone to love us. We want to do good. I think most people want to do good. And we are victims of life circumstances. So I would like to believe that we are very much the same, actually. And I always felt like that when I was traveling, when I was younger, that I love meeting people. It's so interesting to talk to people and to hear about their lives. And so my books being translated has made my world a bit larger. And I enjoy meeting journalists from different countries, and I enjoy meeting readers. It's something that I think will improve my life and my writing. So I'm very grateful for all the translations.
We're very grateful for the books as well. Now I have here a second book, because reliving the past is a recurrent theme of your fiction, and this is another book published in Romanian by Litera Publishing. A question mark is half a heart. Now, how is Ellen's journey similar to Doris's? Because I found some similarities there.
Yes, they're both written by me. But actually, when in the end of the Red Address book, I ask a question, and the last question is, did you love enough? And I think I have small poems in the end of all my books, and I think I write them to myself, actually, just to sum things up. What have I written in this book, and what's the most important thing? And for the Red Address book, it was, did you love enough? And one evening I was, it was my first book, and I got it printed, and it was in paper, and I could go through it, and I was looking in it, and I was looking at that last question, and I started drawing on the page, and I made a heart, because I was thinking about my own life. Did I love enough? And then I made a question mark next to it. Did I? And then I just suddenly saw a question mark is half a heart. And I started thinking about how when we keep secrets to someone, and when we keep secrets to ourselves, we try to be someone we're not. How difficult it is to be loved and to love someone. So that's how the story about Ellen was born. And she has had a very difficult childhood. And she had to be very grown up at a very early age. But she still thinks that she's the one responsible for it. And it's very difficult to see that maybe your childhood wasn't your fault. Maybe you just did as good as you could. But for Ellen, she has spent her whole life trying to prove that she is someone and that she's worthy. And she has done that by becoming a very successful photographer. She has been working very hard, and I think that's very common. People do. Otherwise, some people become criminal and become very outgoing, and some people become very hardworking when they have had a difficult childhood. So that's Elin. So I had Elin go back and relive her childhood as a grown-up. She's middle-aged, just to kind of, forgive herself.
Exactly. I thought it was also a book about embracing trauma and forgiving yourself and learning to love yourself despite what might have happened to you.
Yes, exactly. And also in that book, I raised the question about memories, because sometimes we remember things in a different way.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes little small events become very traumatic and filled with shame, and maybe it wasn't that bad.
Now you start this novel with a quote from Oscar Wilde as a motto. It's a quote I love. We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars. And I must say, it made me think of this crisis of the pandemic and confinement and fear all around the world. And I was wondering, what made you look at the stars in these times of anxiety for everybody?
Well, it has been a very troubled time, I must say, and I often work very hard, and I don't have any problems working. But following the news and reading about all the fear, and like every day the news flashes come, and it's been stressful. I think I have tried to use the time to be creative very much. I've tried to force myself to go into my stories, but I have tried to help neighbors by shopping for them, the old people that shouldn't go out. And so, but I think for me, my life is the social distancing that we do. I live like that all the time almost because I write and I read, and I have a few very good friends that I see, and we've been able to see each other outside, and then I'm a lot in the forest outdoors. So I have had good practice for this period.
As you said, your character in this book is a photographer, and I was wondering, if you were to isolate one image, one photograph which is dear to you from this novel, what would it be?
Oh, it is Frederick and Elin. They were friends when they were small children, and they used to go down to the beach to look at the stars. I think that's a beautiful thing that they did, because that's actually the thing that made them have a good childhood. Because there are in all our experiences, we can find good things too, I think. So exactly. Yes, so I think that's beautiful how they try to learn everything about the sky and the stars and everything that's so big in their small world.
Now your fiction speaks of love and loss, but also of family and hope and the courage of changing one's fate, for instance. Do you see writing as an act of empowerment, or on the contrary, do you feel more vulnerable when writing a story?
I feel very vulnerable when I write my stories. I feel like I die a little for every book. And that sounds very sad, but I put so much energy into these characters that when the book is finished, I'm not myself anymore. I feel I lose a little part of myself. So, yes, they're like my children.
How would you describe yourself as a writer?
Hardworking. I like to write. I get very depressed if I don't write. And curious. I'm very curious about people and about life stories, as I said before. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Please, sorry.
Yeah, I guess those are the two big ones.
What do you do when you don't write?
I like to. I love activities that gives you wind in your face, like mountain biking, skiing, running, paddling on the sea, windsurfing. Yes. When I don't work with my head, I like to work with my body.
Now, and one final question: how do you know when a story is about to be born in your head? How do you know when it starts taking shape?
Oh, that's a super interesting question. It's very difficult to answer, but I think it just comes like a flash in my head. I see something and then I start thinking about it, and I often when I write a book, I have the next book in my head. So I write one book and I think about the next one. So when I finish the book, I can immediately start with the next one because I know what it's going to be about. And I think that process that I use months and months, maybe a year, to think about a story before I start writing it. And that's very important for me.
Ms. Lundberg, thank you so very much. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm looking forward to reading some more of you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye. See you soon.
Bye-bye.